The next time a gray, freezing summer ruins your plans, you will grumble about it and move on. 200 years ago, a summer exactly like that helped kill tens of thousands of people. Crops rotted in the fields. Snow fell in June. Families starved in the streets of Europe. And almost no one alive understood why. You would assume it was just bad weather. But the real answer was already building a year earlier in total silence on the other side of the planet. In April of 1815, a mountain in Indonesia called Tambora exploded. Not erupted, exploded. It was the most powerful volcanic eruption in all of recorded human history. The blast tore the top off the mountain and threw an almost unimaginable amount of rock, ash, and gas into the sky. The sound was heard thousands of kilometers away. Entire communities on the island were buried alive, so completely that a team led by the volcanologist Haraldur Sigurdsson would later dig down and find a house preserved under the ash, with the remains of people still inside. They called it the Pompeii of the East. But the people who died on that island were only the beginning. The real weapon was not the lava, it was the sky. When Tambora blew, it injected a vast cloud of sulfur gas high into the upper atmosphere, far above the weather, where rain could not wash it out. There the sulfur turned into a fine haze of tiny droplets that spread slowly around the entire planet. And that haze did something quiet and deadly. It reflected sunlight, a thin, invisible mirror wrapped around the whole Earth, bouncing a fraction of the sun's warmth back into space before it could reach the ground. So think about what that means. A mountain in Indonesia reached up and turned down the sun for the entire world. It took about a year for the full effect to arrive. And when it did, 1816 became known by a name that still sends a chill through history: the year without a summer. In New England, it snowed in June. Frost killed crops in July and August. Farmers planted, watched their fields freeze, replanted, and watched them freeze again. People called it 1800 and froze to death. In Europe, still exhausted and broke from years of war, the cold and endless rain destroyed harvest after harvest. Food prices soared, bread ran out. There were riots, looting, and in some regions outright famine. It became the worst subsistence crisis of the entire 19th century in the Western world. And here is the part that should unsettle you. Almost no one living through it connected their starving summer to a volcano they had never heard of, on an island most could not have found on a map. They felt the consequences with total force and never saw the cause. The historian Gillen Darcy Wood, who spent years tracing how far Tambora's shadow reached, argues that we are still uncovering how many disasters that single eruption set in motion, because the cold was only the first domino. Follow what falls next. In the chaos of the frozen summer, a young woman was trapped indoors by the relentless gloom near a lake in Switzerland. Day after day of cold rain kept her and her friends inside, and to pass the time they challenged each other to write ghost stories. Her name was Mary Shelley. The story she began that sunless summer became Frankenstein. The same dark weather seeped into the others in that house, helping shape one of the first modern vampire stories as well. Two of the most enduring monsters in all of fiction were born in part from the shadow of a volcano. The dominoes kept falling in directions no one could have predicted. With the cold killing the oat crops across Europe, horses began to starve. And horses were the engine of the entire world, the way everyone and everything moved. In Germany, an inventor named Karl Dreis, searching for a way to travel without a horse, built a strange two-wheeled machine you straddled and pushed along with your feet. It was the direct ancestor of the bicycle. The vehicle you can still ride today traces part of its origin to a year when the horses died because a mountain darkened the sun, and the haze did more than chill the air. It scrambled the great weather systems of the planet. In India, the eruption is thought to have disrupted the monsoon, the rains the entire region depends on, and in the strange wet and dry extremes that followed, scientists believe a new and more dangerous strain of cholera emerged near the Bay of Bengal. That cholera would travel the world's trade routes and kill millions over the following decades. A volcano in 1815 may have helped launch a pandemic that outlived everyone who survived the eruption. So how do we know all this today when the people living through it were so blind to the cause? Part of the answer is frozen at the ends of the Earth. Every year, snow falls on Greenland and Antarctica and turns to ice, trapping a sample of that year's air. Drill down into those ancient layers and you can read the planet's history like rings in a tree. And there, in the layers from those years, scientists find it: a sharp spike of sulfur, a chemical fingerprint pressed into the ice, the silent signature of Tambora recorded by the planet itself long after every human witness had forgotten. Now step back and look at the whole shape of it: a single mountain on a single island on a single morning through a veil across the sky. And from that one event came famine across 2 continents, food riots, the birth of Frankenstein, an early ancestor of the bicycle, and possibly a cholera pandemic that reshaped the modern world. None of the people caught inside it could see the thread connecting their suffering to its source. To grasp how unusual this was, you need a sense of scale. Volcanoes erupt all the time, and most barely nudge the weather. Tambora was in a different category. It threw out far more material than the famous eruption of Krakatoa decades later, and dropped global temperatures by something on the order of 1 degree. That may sound small, but a 1-degree drop in the average temperature of the entire planet arriving all at once is enough to push fragile harvests over the edge across whole continents. The margin between a normal year and a famine year, it turns out, is terrifyingly thin. And the gloom did not only end lives, it seeped into the imagination of the age. The same dim, ash-tinted skies are thought to have given the painter J.M.W. Turner the strangely vivid, blazing sunsets that fill his canvases from those years, the light of the whole world bent through a veil of volcanic haze. The poet Lord Byron, sitting through that same sunless season, wrote a bleak poem simply called Darkness, imagining a world where the sun had gone out and humanity froze and fought over the last fires. He thought he was inventing a nightmare. He was describing almost exactly the summer happening outside his window. The strangeness was global and often eerie. In parts of Europe, the snow that fell did not come down white. It came down red and brown and yellow, stained by the fine volcanic ash still in the air until it looked as though the sky were bleeding onto the fields, and the disaster reached places almost no one in Europe was thinking about. Far to the east in the Yunnan region of China, the same wrecked weather destroyed the rice harvests and brought a devastating famine. Desperate farmers there, unable to grow their usual crops, are thought to have turned increasingly to a hardier plant that could endure the ruined climate, the opium poppy, a shift whose consequences rippled across the region for generations. One mountain, one morning, and its fingerprints ended up pressed onto snow in Europe and poppy fields in China alike. That is the quiet lesson buried in the year without a summer. The forces that shape your life are often invisible, and often began somewhere you would never think to look. A choice you make, a hardship you face, a strange turn in your own year, may have roots reaching back to something enormous and far away, something you will never connect to the moment you are living in. So the next time a cold, gray summer ruins your plans, go ahead and grumble. But remember that once, a summer just like it rearranged the entire world. The weather you barely notice was, for an entire generation, the most powerful and mysterious force on Earth. And the reason was a mountain on the far side of the planet that they never even knew had fallen.